The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Keep your mission on your mind and your mind on your mission. This is Mission Minded with Michael Coleman.
Like all of our shows, Mission Minded is run 5 times a week, at least 5 times a week, and it lives in infamy wherever the Tony Kurre Radio podcast is, wherever you get your podcast. We're on every major industry, so it doesn't matter what your podcast or preference is. You'll find Mission Minded with Michael Coleman, of course, formerly the Jimmy Hill Mission, now with the Montgomery Food Bank. They serve 35 counties in the great state of Alabama and Feeding America, and they're doing a wonderful job throughout this holiday season. Michael, how are you doing? Everything good?
Yeah, just waiting for Santa Claus to come around and see, since I've been such a good boy this year, see what he brings.
Yeah, no coal for Michael this year. We're going to jump right into it because I want to talk about, this is a great time of the year for a lot of businesses. People are taking time off. There's holiday parties. People are wanting to exercise flex plans before the end of the year. For a lot of bosses, not so much because they're trying to wrap up the end of the year books. They got things they got to do for budget starting in January and everything else. But Jan in Gardendale, info at TonyKurreRadio.net, info at TonyKurreRadio.net. We'll get to all your emails. Said, what is Michael's take on office Christmas parties? Is it rude not to show up? Christmas parties have changed a lot over the last 25 or 30 years. Certainly in the radio industry, they have changed tremendously. We now have, we used to have the Christmas party, then we had the after party, and then we added another after party afterwards. and that third party was actually the original Christmas party that we used to have back in the 70s and 80s. So, I mean, we've gotten politically correct, and I think that's probably a good thing. But if you don't show up at an office party, what does that say to your boss?
Well, I will tell you, it can all, as with most things, it depends on the boss. My perspective is, and I will tell you, we have not done a Christmas party here for several years, and one of the employees came to me and said it was really important to some people and want to know, could we reinstate it? And so I was willing to look at it. And the question was, well, why did we stop having it? And really what it was is because it's just sometimes when you have a lot of people working together and maybe there's some tension or some division, people didn't, so they started doing like department level. And I'm like, no, we're going to be one big happy family, a little forced family fun as we talk about it. If you don't show up to a Christmas party, typically there's one or two reasons. Like I don't want to hang out, and maybe a culture issue, or there may be some. Of course, there's not any alcohol where we are, but lots of times it's because they don't put anything into it, and it's just one of those mandatory things. It's just painful to go to. Yep. But I will tell you, I've always asked the question: if somebody doesn't come to a Christmas party, why didn't they come? And if they just didn't come, I'm not interested in making them come. But it does kind of point to something as to I would at least be curious to know the why. Now, not looking to blame, not looking to punish, but it might give me insights into how employees feel about the overall culture. So I think you should, if you feel strongly about not attending, then I don't disagree with that, but I would encourage you to provide that feedback to your HR or to your boss as to why, not necessarily from projecting it as a negative, but just help them understand what you're seeing in the organization can turn out to be helpful overall.
Yeah, I mean, it goes beyond being a party pooper. You don't look like a team member if you're not going to a party. I can specifically think of one time where I didn't go to one of our Christmas parties, and I don't remember the reason. I don't know if I was going to be out of town or if I had some other party going on, and man, I caught a hard time for it and just was really surprised. And in my boss's mind, he was wanting, and we had kind of downsized to the point where it was kind of like we all met somewhere, and then he ended up renting out a place and spent $20,000 to put on a good party for his team, and he expected people to be there. And,
That's right.
And it hurt his feelings. And I caught hell for about a week and a half after that party that I didn't show up. And I just was kind of like, because I hadn't been to some of the other parties. But in this particular case, we had a good year, and he really wanted to show his appreciation to all the employees. And he took it very personal that I didn't show up.
Well, sometimes you have them off site and they can get rowdy and there can be alcohol. Like you said, back in the day, that was just the norm. Today, they're, I think, probably as a whole, a little bit more subdued. Ours certainly is. And really what I'm looking at it for is I'm going to have a bag up under the Christmas tree so that every employee leaves here with something.
There you go.
Just a little token of appreciation. And it gives me a chance just to stand in front of the employees and thank them for the hard work they've done. And they get off a little early that day. So it's not going to be too painful for them. I don't want to prolong it. But we're just going to eat a meal together and just talk about the good things that we're doing and just try to be encouraging. Everybody leave with a little gift and, just kind of kick off Christmas right. But if it's off-site and there's alcohol and then there's, how people get when they're alcohol, you already have a struggle sometimes with boundaries, with male and female relationships at work, and then you put alcohol in the mix. So there may be some real legitimate reasons she doesn't want to go, but I think it would be healthy if you just communicated those.
Yeah, I mean, we got to the point where we did, the tickets. You had 2 tickets, so you can get two drinks. That way you don't have to worry about people over drinking. And certainly if they wanted to go, if you wanted to have the after party, you knew your group. Dr. Josh always tells me to read your room. Read your room. And
right.
I can remember going to a Christmas party, one of the first Christmas parties I had. It was at the radio station. It was in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I mean, the bathtub was filled up with jungle juice. I mean, that was it. In order to get in, you had to Xerox a part of your body. and that's what radio parties were about. And obviously we didn't do that the last couple of Christmas parties I went to when I was at Cumulus. But you got to read your room, and you got to be inclusive, and you got to make it comfortable for everybody. And if you got that group and everyone's got that group that like to go out after work on Fridays at 5:00 and you want to continue the party somewhere else, then knock yourself out. But in most parties too, you're bringing your mate, you're bringing your husband, your wife, sometimes you're bringing your children, and you're a lot of people are like, Christmas parties just aren't like they used to be. Well, it's probably a good thing in a lot of ways. You can always go off and do your own thing with your buddies afterwards. But a really interesting article here. Mission Minded, Michael Coleman, of course, the executive director. He's the CFO, CEO down there at the Montgomery Food Bank, and just gets after it. And they're super busy time. We greatly appreciate his time here. You can hear the show 5 times a week, 10 o'clock every Monday through Friday morning, 10 o'clock Central Time, and wherever you get your podcast. Inc. Magazine had an article, Business Owners, Get Your Holiday Greetings Right. And they gave 3 particular situations here. And I do think it's interesting because the holidays mean different things to different people. Number 1, sending out greetings, be specific. Number 2, value cultural differences. And number 3, beware of excess jollity, being too jolly. Let's start with the first one, though. And I think this is interesting because depending on the size of your employee ranks and how many people you have working for you, they're saying be more specific. If you're going to handwrite messages or handwrite emails, maybe mention something they did during the year that you really appreciate, as opposed to saying, hey, have a great 2023 or happy holidays.
Yeah. I have done both. And I think when you're, and it's really just anybody, whether it's your customers, whether it's your employees or whatever. I remember one time my HR had put together a bunch of cards, and they said, we just want you to sign your name. And I thought to myself, well, here's a store-bought card. I signed my name. What is that really conveying? And it conveys that I don't really have any real connection to the individual employees. And I did it one year because I was in a hurry. And, I said, it's shame on me for not taking the time to express something about them. For instance, it could be maybe they've had an illness in the family. And I add a couple of sentences that go, hey, I know this has been a hard year for you with your mother's illness or your child's illness or this, just to personalize it a little bit, because I just can't emphasize enough to leaders in organizations that when you just take that little bit of extra time to stop and say, how are you doing? Or I heard you're wrestling with this or wrestling with that. It pays benefits for days, weeks, months to come, because when somebody feels like that you genuinely care about them, and it's just something little like that, but hey, they remembered my brother, my sister, my whatever. I will tell you, back in the Army, the most impressed I've probably ever been was I worked for a full bird colonel, was going to make general, and he did. But he was in a brigade. He was a brigade commander over about 1,500 people. And he was a man who could remember people's names, and he would run into now he was the highest ranking person in our brigade as a brigade commander. He would run into the commissary, and he would run into like a private. But if he had met that private, he would remember his name, and he would go up and say, how is your wife doing? Or I remember you talked about this. And it is so impactful when you're like, the head of this organization remembers me, remembers my name. And I remember going, wow. I mean, just hearing about it, I was so impressed. And I've tried to do that. I'm not near as good at it as this person was. But I just remember that stuck with me because I saw the response of those people. And if he would have turned around and told them to run through a brick wall, they would have run through a brick wall for him. Yep. And you just build loyalty, and you build appreciation, and you build value and relationships like that. When you let people know you care, man, it can make such a difference in how you lead them in an organization.
No, and we live in such a technical world. And I remember the first time, she's now my ex, but my wife sent me an email birthday card. And it broke my heart. I mean, I'm a card guy. It only takes a few seconds to get a card and write a nice, simple, personal note. And I would imagine that a lot of people in a business would appreciate that as well. And yet it's not something you have to do. You could be a great leader and a great boss and not write handwritten notes for Christmas. But if you do, You're right, man. People remember those things. I've got every handwritten note that I've gotten from every client or any business I've ever done a remote for, and I keep them because they're just so rare.
Before we leave that, I'll give you one from a business perspective. So I was told, so when you're raising funds in the nonprofit world, you're competing for people's dollars. Mm-hmm. And you want that to be real and true. And so you're always looking, well, how can I do it better than the next person in terms of expressing appreciation? And it's so funny with all the modern technology, the thing that seems to have the greatest impact is like a personal handwritten card. And I've written cards to people. And I remember one guy sent me an email that said, Michael, this is his first donation, but it was it was like $3,500. And I wrote him a thank you card, and it wasn't just, hey, thanks for the donation. It was lengthy, and put it in the mail to him. And he sends me this email, and he says, it's more and more rare these days to get a thank you letter for a donation, but it's really rare to get a handwritten note. And now you've forced me to make another donation. And he turned around and gave like $5,000. So I didn't appreciate for a long time how the value of that personal touch, and I've seen it time after time after time.
There you go. He's Michael Coleman, mission-minded. He, of course, helps Feeding America with the Montgomery Food Bank, 35 counties they take care of, and it is a busy time. We're talking about Christmas parties, the rights and wrongs of Christmas parties as a boss man. We've got Christmas, we got Kwanzaa, we got Hanukkah, we got Festivus. We all have different cultural meanings and differences that go into the holiday, and a lot of people just say be safe and say happy holidays. But boy, it does mean a lot when you say happy Kwanzaa or happy Hanukkah to somebody who's Jewish or otherwise. But value your cultural differences in your employees. And we're living in more of a diversified means now than we've ever have. I mean, it was just kind of a Merry Christmas and that was it. Now all of a sudden we have all these different cultures and different people. We actually did something on Fox 6 last week talking about Black Santas and how do you acknowledge people of the Jewish community and the Jewish faith during the holidays, and it's super important.
Yeah, and there's not a one size fits all, and some people may feel like that's ridiculous that it's Merry Christmas and
yep.
If you say Merry Christmas, that nobody should be offended by that, but I think where the offense sometimes comes in is just assuming that it's all from a Christian perspective, and that is my perspective. I do have a Christian perspective, but I also want to be mindful of people who celebrate um, aspects of religion or their faith that's different than mine, and certainly don't want to do anything to unintentionally diminish them. And so, I do try to be sensitive to who I'm writing with. And I will tell you, most of the nonprofit work I have been in has been from a faith-based, Christian-based perspective. But I also have, I'm in the food bank world, and the food bank is sectarian in nature. Now, we have lots of wonderful Christians that donate, but we have lots of wonderful Jewish neighbors. We have Muslims that donate. We have atheists who donate. So, who genuinely care about their community and the problems of hunger and food insecurity. So even though I am a Christian, I want to be mindful of how I write my thank you notes and not write it necessarily from a Christian perspective, but a more broad perspective. And it's not because I'm sacrificing my beliefs at all. I'll sit down and share those with anybody who asks. But I'm just grateful for everybody who's in this fight, and I don't want to do anything that's going to cause them to step back and say, well, if you're Christian, you're worthy of gratitude, but if you don't agree with me in my faith, that somehow there's going to be less than warmth coming from me, and that's absolutely not the case and can't be the case.
Now, this last one I am guilty of because I can Clark Griswold it pretty good. And when I'm getting ready to go on vacation or the holidays, I like to blow it out. I don't like to force anything on anybody, but boy, if you're going to be with me, we're going to have a good time. Beware of excess jollity. I think we all like to think that for the most part, we're all a little happier on the holidays for a lot of different reasons. First of all, it's the birth of our baby Jesus, and we're also getting some more time off. We're going to see friends and family we haven't seen in a while, and that's great. But for some people, quite frankly, it's a challenge. It's very, very difficult. And so it's important not to force your jollity on people. Have you ever done that?
Oh, well, I would tell you, if I were honest, my family, well, let me say this. If you were to talk to my family, they would tell you I look way more like the Scrooge at Christmas
really?
than I do Santa Claus. So, but I am mindful, like my father's, the anniversary of his death is going to be the 17th, in just a few days. And there's a lot of people that this isn't necessarily a time of celebration, or their celebration is at least tempered by the loss of loved ones, or this may be like last year was my wife's first Christmas without her mother, and Christmas was always a big deal to her mother, and she tried to make it special. And so you have to be mindful that everybody's life is different and shaped by different things. And so don't, I guess, be insensitive by just assuming because it's Christmas and there should be some happiness and there's presents and there's family and all that. That's good. But it could just be the opposite depending on what's occurred in others' lives.
So important. And again, it's okay to be happy. I mean, go do your thing and say, say Merry Christmas to people and do your thing. And for the most part, people are going to understand. Something else I think is really interesting is sometimes, and I've been in the situation where, and we're talking to Michael Coleman from the Montgomery Food Bank, 35 counties they handle, and certainly looking for any contributions you can make. From a food standpoint, this particular year, they do a wonderful job for Feeding America. Sometimes you get in and there's a portion of the night where you must talk business. And I've never liked that. This is a Christmas party. If we have to go over the year we had or talk about, don't sell me business on Christmas on our Christmas party night. I have seen it. And I know sometimes the GM wants to get up there and they want to talk about some things that happened. They got to take the floor because they have to present to everybody, and then they'll hand out coupons or give you a chance to win bingo or whatever. But I don't want to hear about business on my Christmas party. I don't. And they're saying don't do that.
Right. Well, and that's true. Unless you can do it, number one, from a completely positive perspective. And this to me goes back to the relationship. So imagine if you're a boss gets up there, but he hadn't spoken to you all year long, and then he gets up and he says, "Oh, I just want to tell you how valuable y'all are to the company and how much we appreciate you." It falls on deaf ears. It just rings a little hollow, if you will. And then there's others who might say, "Hey, I'm gonna take this time to point out our sales goals for next year and all that kind of stuff." Who they just can't get away from it. What I try to do is I try to develop authentic relationship as much as I can, and then speak to, not without going through a lot of details, but just speaking to the fact that I know that the challenge that we face is incredibly difficult, and the fact is that the people in our organization are making the lives of others different. Let me tell you. I think I told you before we went on the air, we're right next to Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery. We had 153 Air Force volunteers on Saturday, but you get special stories out of it. So one of the guys got a little teary-eyed, and he said, "I grew up here in Montgomery, and I remember us going and getting food, and if it wasn't for the food bank, my family would not have had enough to eat."
Wow. And
so here he is in the Air Force, in the middle of an Air Force career, coming over here packing boxes for others, and it just took a whole different level. And so I want our guys to know, look, that's because you come here every day, that you are making a difference in your community. You are bringing hope to people. You are alleviating suffering for children and for seniors. And so to me, that's what I like to talk about, rather than getting into the technical aspects of business or talking about numbers and dollars and all that. It's just to express appreciation. But if you don't know the very employees you're talking to, you run the risk of that running a little ringing hollow, as I said.
Yeah. We have another email, info@tonycurryradio.net, info@tonycurryradio.net. That's Curry with a K. And this is from Thomas in Greenville. He wants to know and I love this because you get to answer these questions. If you know you're going to have to lay somebody off or fire somebody by the end of the year, do you do it before the end of the year, or do you wait till January? There's never a good time for a breakup. I know it's a horrible time. You don't want to do it right before the holidays, obviously, because they probably spent more money than they probably needed to on Christmas gifts for their family. If you can hold off till January, how do you handle that?
Well, that's a tough question. And I will tell you, I'm not sure which Thomas it is, but I was born and raised in Greenville, so he's really sticking it to me on that one. One of my homeboys doing that to me. Well, I will tell you, it depended on the urgency of what happened. If it's somebody who has just not adapted well, we've tried to coach him, we've tried to do that, he's just not coming along, and I'm like, no, I'm not gonna fire somebody right before Christmas. It would have to be something like theft or, some sort of sexual interaction with another employee, some sexual harassment, something like that was so egregious, I had to remove them from the premises right away. And that's really, pretty rare. Most of the time is we're trying to understand where people, again, I've said this, I say it over and over and over, but it's just so important to me is that, I tell employees all the time, we have square pegs and round pegs, and we need both. It doesn't matter whether you're a square peg or a round peg. We need both. The problem is the square pegs got to be in the square holes and round pegs and round holes. And where we get problematic is lots of times we find out, well, we got a square peg, but he's in a round hole, and so we got to move him. And that's part of, rather than firing somebody, that's part of trying to develop, and that's part of what the relationship's about. Saying, look, I care about you. It would be easier just to fire you and send you on your way, but I want to spend the time. You are worth the time to try to develop. But even then, sometimes that doesn't work out. But I would say, to go back and answer that question very specifically, I don't think I would fire them unless it was absolutely, the offense was so egregious that I just had to take them off the premises right now.
So you'd figure it out even if it's a situation where you needed to save the salary or save the money, but as long as they were doing their work, you'd figure out a way to make that work.
Well, I go into an understanding that, you're going to get different productivity from different people. And I'll give you an example. I've had somebody in the past that was almost what you IQ level you would designate as special needs. And this person did things sometimes that were frustrating, but like he would call out every payday. Every payday he wasn't going to show up to work. But when he did come to work, he was very good. He didn't create drama, but he was just doing some custodial work. He was already at max capacity. He just couldn't handle the pressure. He didn't have the intellect and other ways. And so I was like, well, this is all he's given us, everything he's got. And to me, that was enough for that. So I have to evaluate. Where I get most frustrated with employees is when I take the time to say, I will equip you, I will give you the tools you need, I will give you the training you need, I'll give you everything you need. And then they still give you half of what they're capable of doing. I'm much more likely to, even though that half may be more productive than the person given 80%, but just doesn't have the same capabilities, I would almost rather take the guy who's giving me 80%, because that's the guy that when things change, he's like, just tell me what you need me to do. I'm gonna give you, I'm all in. As opposed to the guy who's giving you 50%, is very likely good because he's not bought in, and so when things don't go his way, he's going to present more problems down the road.
Yeah, and I think COVID has spoken to so many of us, and it's taught us so much about ourselves. We've been under this really bright light for 2.5 years, and of course, it's still rearing its head to an extent, and flu season's here, but. If your job was directly affected by COVID, and what I mean by that is maybe you were part of the Zoom generation, or maybe you were part of the social media generation where people were staying home and utilizing your business more, that's great. But no, by making that expansion of employment because they need people to fill those, everything corrects itself. You know what I mean? The case.
Well, I've definitely been seeing a swing back to the previous. You could just look at some of the language of a lot of the tech people now. It seems like across the board, they're all saying, come back to work or quit your job, or, come back to work or we're going to fire you. And I still think as a whole that employees have more leverage right now, mm-hmm. but you definitely see it swinging back to the more normal time frame of pre-COVID.
That's true. Hey, Michael, fantastic show. Tell people how they can help the Montgomery Food Bank.
Yeah, go to mafb.org and support. If you're in the Montgomery area, I'd love to have you volunteer, do a food drive, whatever you can do, or just come by and let us give you a tour of what's going on. But if you're far away and you've been blessed with the resources, we'd love for you to go donate at mafb.org.
You're a good man. We'll talk to you next week. Appreciate you, brother.
Have a great Christmas, everybody.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.